The vampire king had seen death 1,000 times, but the broken girl bleeding into the dirt made something ancient in his chest crack open. King Severin had been riding the border of his territory when he caught the scent. Blood, fear, the acrid stench of wolf-pack cruelty. He found her crumpled on the forest road, her body a canvas of violence. Bruises bloomed purple and black across her skin. Cuts still wept crimson. Her breathing came in shallow gasps that barely moved her ribs. She was dying. He dismounted and knelt beside her, his ancient senses cataloging every injury with cold fury. The pack's scent was fresh. They'd left her here deliberately, tossed aside like garbage once they'd finished with her. Her wolf was so suppressed he could barely sense it. Omega, the pack's favorite target. Severin slid his arms beneath her broken body and lifted her as carefully as glass. Her eyes fluttered open for a heartbeat, wide and brown, filled with such hollow resignation that something in him snarled with rage. "Please," she whispered, "just let it end." No. He carried her to his castle himself, moving faster than human sight could track. His servants scattered when he burst through the doors, his face a mask of lethal calm that they knew meant someone would die for this. Healers. Now. His voice cut through the hall like a blade. Save her. They worked for hours. Severin stood in the doorway of his own chambers, watching them clean wounds and set bones and pour healing potions down her unconscious throat. When they finally left, bowing low and promising she would live, he pulled a chair to her bedside and sat. The girl looked impossibly small in his bed. They dressed her in a soft nightgown and bandaged the worst of the cuts. Her face was still swollen, one eye bruised shut. Her wrists bore rope burns and what looked like teeth marks. His hands curled into fists. Whoever did this would beg for death before he granted it. She woke near dawn with a gasp that turned into a whimper of pain. Her good eyes shot open, finding him immediately. Terror flooded her face. She tried to move, to run, and cried out when her broken ribs protested. "Be still." Severin kept his voice soft, the tone he used for wounded creatures. "You're badly hurt." She stared at him, chest heaving with panic. Her gaze darted around the room, taking in the silk sheets, the warm fire, the morning light filtering through heavy curtains. Confusion joined the fear. "Where?" Her voice cracked. She swallowed and tried again. "What do you want?" "Nothing." She didn't believe him. He could see it in the way she pressed herself into the pillows, trying to make herself smaller. She was waiting for the trap to spring, waiting for him to show his true intentions. "You're in my castle," he said quietly. "I found you on the road. My healers saved your life." "Why?" The question came out broken, disbelieving, as if kindness was a language she'd forgotten how to speak. "Because you were dying." Her jaw trembled. She looked away, staring at the far wall with that same hollow resignation he'd seen in her eyes on the road. She expected him to hurt her, expected this to be another game, another cruelty. She was already bracing for it. Severin stood slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. Her body went rigid. "The door is unlocked," he said. "If you want to leave when you're healed, you may. If you want to stay, you may. Either way, you're safe now." He moved toward the door. "You're lying." Her voice was barely a whisper. "No one helps for nothing." Severin paused in the doorway and looked back at her, at this broken girl who'd been taught that kindness always came with a price. "Then I'll prove it," he said simply. He settled into the chair outside her door and didn't move for the rest of the night. She never slept, he knew. He could hear her shallow breathing, hear the way she shifted carefully every few minutes, testing her injuries, waiting for him to come back through that door. He never did. 3 days, and she still flinched every time the door opened. Sarah had learned the rhythm of the castle. Servants came in the morning with breakfast, at midday with lunch, at evening with dinner. They were kind, too kind. They smiled and curtsied and asked if she needed anything in soft voices that made her want to scream. She didn't eat. Food was a weapon where she came from. Poisoned, withheld, used to control. She'd learned not to trust anything freely given. On the 3rd day, the door opened, and it wasn't a servant. King Severin entered carrying a tray himself. Sarah's breath caught. She hadn't seen him since that first night. Part of her had wondered if she'd imagined him. Imagined the way he'd looked at her injuries with something like rage in his ancient eyes. He was real. Tall and broad-shouldered, moving with the fluid grace of a predator. Black hair fell to his shoulders. His face could have been carved from marble, beautiful and cold and timeless. But his eyes, dark as midnight, held something she couldn't name when they found hers. "You haven't eaten," he said. Not an accusation. A fact. Sarah said nothing. She'd learned silence was safer than words. Severin set the tray on the table near the window and sat down. He served himself a plate, slow and deliberate, and began to eat. He didn't look at her, didn't speak, just ate quietly while morning light spilled across his shoulders. Sarah watched him, confused. Was this a test? A game? Her stomach cramped with hunger she'd been ignoring for days, and the smell of warm bread made her dizzy. He pushed the tray toward the empty chair across from him and continued eating. 5 minutes passed. 10. He finished his plate and simply sat there, looking out the window as if he had nowhere else to be. As if sitting in silence with a broken Omega girl was exactly where a vampire king wanted to spend his morning. Sarah's hand shook when she reached for the bread. She tore off a small piece and brought it to her mouth, watching him for any reaction. He didn't move, didn't look at her, just kept his gaze on the gardens outside. She chewed slowly, swallowed. Nothing happened. No punishment, no cruelty, just bread and morning light, and a vampire king who acted like this was normal. When she reached for a second piece, Severin stood. Sarah flinched back and immediately hated herself for it. "I'll leave you to eat in peace," he said quietly, and walked to the door. "Wait." The word escaped before she could stop it. He paused, hand on the doorframe, and looked back. "Why?" Her voice came out rough, desperate. "Why are you doing this?" Something flickered across his face. Not pity. Something older. Something that looked almost like understanding, because no one else did. He left before she could respond. Sarah stared at the closed door, at the tray of food, at the unlocked handle she'd tested a dozen times. Her chest felt tight. Wrong. Like something was shifting inside her that she didn't know how to name. That evening, the servant who brought dinner smiled at her. "You ate today. The king will be pleased." "Does he?" Sarah hesitated. "Does he always sit with prisoners?" The servant's smile faded into something more serious. "You're not a prisoner, miss. And no, the king doesn't explain himself to anyone." She leaned in slightly, voice dropping. "But I've served him for 60 years, and I've never seen him keep vigil outside anyone's door before. Whatever was done to you." Her eyes hardened. "He's killed men for far less." After she left, Sarah walked to the window and looked out at the darkening gardens. Somewhere in this castle was a vampire king who'd saved her life for no reason she understood, who sat with her in silence so she'd feel safe enough to eat, who gave her his chambers and slept elsewhere. She didn't know what to do with kindness that asked for nothing in return. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, she wanted to find out. She found him in the throne room at midnight, alone, and for the first time, she wasn't afraid to speak. Orchestrated narrative beats for character-driven chapter progression. Good, I'm writing chapter 3 now. Let me continue and make sure to hit the key beats from the outline. Sarah asks why he saved her. Severin explains he smelled the cruelty, couldn't leave her. She reveals she was the Omega used as punishment. He asks permission to hunt them down. She says yes. Real conversation. She sees his loneliness and rage on her behalf. After he asks, will you stay? She says, for now. Target word count. 650 to 750 words. Sarah had spent a week in the castle. Her ribs no longer screamed with every breath. The bruises had faded from purple to yellow-green. She could walk without limping now, though she still moved carefully out of habit. She'd been exploring at night, when the halls were quieter, when she was less likely to run into servants who looked at her with concern she didn't know how to accept. Tonight, her wandering had brought her to the throne room. Severin sat on the steps below his throne, not on it. He looked almost human in the candlelight, his face less marble and more man, tired, ancient, alone. He glanced up when she entered, and something in his expression softened. Can't sleep? He asked. I never sleep. The truth came easier now. She moved closer, her bare feet silent on cold stone. Why did you save me? He'd been expecting the question. She could tell by the way he didn't hesitate. I smelled what they did to you, he said quietly. The fear, the pain, the pack scent all over you like a brand. His jaw tightened. I've lived over 1,000 years, Sarah. I've seen cruelty in every form. But I've never been able to walk away from it when it crosses my path. You knew I was Omega. I knew you were dying. Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, old shame rising like bile. I was the pack's punishment. When someone failed, when someone broke the rules, they used me to remind everyone what happened to the weak. Her voice stayed steady. She'd cried all her tears a long time ago. The Alpha's son killed a human on accident, drew attention from the council, so they... She stopped, swallowed. They left me on that road when they were done. I thought I'd finally get to stop existing. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. When she looked at Severin, his eyes had gone completely black. Power rolled off him in waves that made the candles flicker. Give me their names, he said, and his voice carried the weight of 1,000 years of violence. Give me permission, and I'll make sure they never hurt anyone again. She should have been afraid. Should have flinched away from the leashed rage in every line of his body. Instead, something fierce and broken inside her whispered yes. The Blackwater Pack, she said. Alpha Marcus Blackwater and his son Ethan. 12 enforcers who followed orders. She met his black eyes. Yes. You have my permission. Severin stood, and she saw him then. Not the gentle vampire who sat with her while she ate, but the king who'd ruled for centuries through blood and power. He moved toward her, and she didn't back away. They'll come for you when they find out you're alive, he said. They'll claim pack law. They'll want you back. Let them try. Something like approval flickered across his face. He stopped an arm's length away, close enough that she could feel the cold that clung to his skin. Why are you really doing this? Sarah asked again, softer. You could have any mate you wanted, any queen. Why save a broken Omega who can't give you anything? You're not broken. His voice was certain, final. And I don't need anything from you. He paused, and for the first time she saw something uncertain in his ancient eyes. Something almost vulnerable. I saved you because you deserve to be saved. I'm keeping you safe because... He stopped, started again. I've been alone a very long time, Sarah. I stopped expecting to find someone who understood what that felt like. She saw it then, what she'd missed before. The loneliness that lived in him, like a second skin. The weight of centuries without equals, without companionship, without someone who didn't fear or worship him. I understand, she whispered. They stood there in candlelight and silence. Two lonely creatures who'd found something unexpected in each other. Not love, not yet, but understanding, recognition. Will you stay? Severin asked. Every instinct she'd honed through years of survival told her to run, to never trust, to expect the worst. But standing here in his throne room at midnight, she found she didn't want to listen to those instincts anymore. For now, she said. The smile that crossed his face was small and real, and worth more than every pretty lie she'd ever been told. For now is enough. The Alpha came for her at dawn with 12 wolves, and the Vampire King met them at the gates with a smile that promised death. Sarah woke to shouting. She'd been sleeping better the last few nights, her body finally believing what her mind was learning, that she was safe here. But the sound of her former Alpha's voice cut through the castle like a knife, and she was moving before conscious thought caught up. She threw on a robe and ran to the main hall where servants were whispering urgently. Through the windows, she could see them, 13 wolves in human form, standing outside the gates. Alpha Marcus Blackwater at their front, his son Ethan beside him. Where is she? Marcus's voice boomed across the courtyard. The Omega belongs to Blackwater Pack. I'm here to retrieve stolen property. Sarah's blood went cold. Property, that's all she'd ever been to them. You should stay inside, miss, a servant urged. But Sarah was already moving toward the doors. Severin stood at the gate, relaxed and unhurried. He looked almost bored, but Sarah had learned to read him now, and she could see the violence coiled beneath his calm exterior. His hands were loose at his sides. Ready. There's no property here, Severin said, his voice carrying easily. Only a guest who's chosen to stay under my protection. Pack law supersedes vampire hospitality. Marcus stepped forward, all arrogant authority. The Omega is bound to Blackwater. She returns with us. She has a name. Severin's voice went cold, and she's not going anywhere. Then you declare war over an Omega? Ethan laughed, cruel and mocking. She's not worth it, bloodsucker. She's not worth anything. We used her up already. Severin moved so fast, Sarah almost missed it. One moment he was at the gate, the next, his hand was wrapped around Ethan's throat, lifting him off the ground like he weighed nothing. Say that again, Severin said softly. The other wolves surged forward, and Severin's guards appeared from nowhere, a dozen vampires moving to block them. The courtyard erupted into chaos, shouting, threats, the promise of violence hanging thick in the air. Sarah couldn't breathe. This was her fault. They'd come for her. They'd start a war for her. Not because they cared, but because she dared to survive, dared to be free. No. The word echoed in her mind like a bell. She'd spent her whole life being used, being traded, being owned. She'd let them break her down until she believed she was nothing. But she wasn't nothing. Severin had shown her that. He'd given her safety and asked for nothing. He'd sat with her in silence and let her heal. He'd seen her as a person, not property. And she was done being afraid. Sarah pushed through the doors and walked onto the battlements above the gate. Every eye turned to her. Marcus's face twisted with rage. Ethan wheezed in Severin's grip. The wolves watched her with contempt. They didn't bother hiding. "I'm not going back." Her voice rang out clear and steady. "I'm not your property. I never was. The pack abandoned me to die, and King Severin saved my life." She looked at Marcus, at the alpha who'd let his wolves torture her for years. "I don't belong to Blackwater Pack anymore. I belong to no one but myself." "You don't get to choose," Marcus snarled. "You're Omega. You do what you're told." "Then come up here and make me." The challenge hung in the air like a blade. Marcus's eyes went wolf gold. He shifted and lunged, faster than human, claws extended for her throat. Severin dropped Ethan and moved. He caught Marcus mid-leap, one hand around the alpha's throat, the other seizing his jaw. For a heartbeat, they stood frozen. "You should have stayed away," Severin said. He twisted. The snap echoed across the courtyard. Marcus's body hit the ground and didn't move. The pack stared in shock. Their alpha, dead in seconds. "Anyone else?" Severin asked calmly. The wolves backed away. Ethan scrambled toward his father's body, his face white. The others were already shifting, running, disappearing into the forest. In 30 seconds, the courtyard was empty, except for 2 corpses and the dawn light. Sarah's legs gave out. She sat down hard on the battlement stone, shaking not with fear, but with something else. Something that felt almost like freedom. Severin was beside her in an instant, kneeling so they were eye level. "Are you all right?" She looked at him. This ancient vampire king who'd just killed an alpha for her, who'd let her make her own choice, who'd been ready to fight a war but let her fight her own battle first. "Thank you," she whispered. He reached out slowly, telegraphing the movement, and took her hand. His skin was cool against hers, steady. "You saved yourself," he said quietly. "I just removed the obstacle." And for the first time in her life, Sarah believed that she was worth saving. The blood bond ceremony was her idea, and that made all the difference. A month had passed since the alpha's death. The Blackwater Pack had scattered, leaderless and broken. No one had come for Sarah again. The vampire king had made his position clear, and no one was foolish enough to challenge him twice. Sarah spent her days exploring the castle, learning its secrets. She spent her evenings in the library with Severin, reading or talking or simply existing in comfortable silence. She spent her nights actually sleeping, her body finally believing what her heart had learned. She was safe here. She was home. But something had shifted between them. Something that went deeper than safety or gratitude. She'd catch him watching her with an expression she was learning to read, soft, wondering, like she was something precious he was afraid to touch. She'd started noticing things too. The way he smiled when she argued with him. The way he always stood between her and the door. Old protective instincts he probably didn't realize he had. The way his eyes tracked her across every room like he couldn't help it. It terrified her. Not because she didn't trust him, she did, completely. But because she was starting to want things she'd never let herself want before. She found him in his study after midnight, reviewing reports from his border guards. He looked up when she entered, and that soft expression crossed his face again. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "I slept. I woke up." Sarah closed the door behind her and moved to stand in front of his desk. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "I want to ask you something." Severin set down his papers, giving her his full attention. "Anything." "The blood bond." She said it quickly before she lost her nerve. "Your advisor mentioned it. She said it's how vampire kings choose their queens." Something flickered in his eyes. Careful. Guarded. "It is. It's permanent. Eternal. It ties two souls together across lifetimes." Sarah had done her research. She'd spent days in the library learning everything she could about vampire customs, vampire bonds, vampire marriage. "Yes." His voice was quiet, wary, like he wasn't sure where this was going, but was afraid to hope. "I want that." The words came out steady. "Sure. With you, I want to be your queen, if you'll have me." Severin went very still. "Sarah, I know what I'm asking." She moved around the desk, closer to him. "I know it's forever. I know I'll be bound to you for the rest of my life and whatever comes after. I know." Her voice softened. "I know I'm just a broken omega with nothing to offer a king." "Stop." Severin stood, and his hand came up to cup her face with a gentleness that made her chest ache. "You are not broken. You are not just anything. You're—" He stopped, started again. "You're the first person in 1,000 years who's made me feel less alone. You're brave and strong, and you've survived things that would have destroyed anyone else. You're—" His thumb brushed across her cheek. "You're everything I didn't know I was waiting for." Tears burned behind Sarah's eyes. "Then why do you look afraid?" "Because I need you to be sure." His voice was fierce, intense. "The blood bond isn't something you can undo. Once I mark you, you're mine forever. I need to know this is what you want. Not because you feel grateful, not because you feel safe, but because you choose this. Choose me." Sarah turned her face into his palm, this man who'd shown her what kindness looked like, what protection without ownership looked like, what love. Because that's what this was, she realized. What love looked like when it was real. "I choose you," she said simply. "I choose this. I'm sure. Ask me again tomorrow." His eyes were black and intense. "And the day after. And the day after that. Ask me 100 times. I need to know you're certain." So she did. She asked him the next morning over breakfast. He said, "Are you sure?" And she said, "Yes." She asked him 3 days later in the gardens. He said, "You have time to think." And she said, "I don't need it." She asked him a week later in the throne room in front of his entire court. He looked at her like she'd given him the world and said, "One more time." She asked him that night in the doorway of his chambers, the ones that had been hers, that were about to become theirs. "I choose you," she said. "Now and always. Are you going to make me ask 100 times?" Severin smiled, real and warm and devastating. "No. I just needed to be sure you knew you had the choice." The blood bond ceremony was simple. Ancient words in a language older than kingdoms. His fangs piercing her wrist, where packed teeth had once marked her as worthless. Her blood on his tongue, freely given, while she held his gaze and didn't look away. The bond snapped into place like a cord pulling taut. She felt him, his presence, his emotions, his ancient soul, settling into the empty spaces inside her. He gasped and pulled her close, and she knew he felt it too. The way she completed something in him he hadn't known was broken. "My queen," he whispered against her hair, "my king." she whispered back. That night, she slept in his arms without nightmares. She woke to sunlight and gentle kisses and the certain knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged. Weeks later, she stood on the battlements watching the sunrise, Severin's arms wrapped around her from behind. She leaned into him, into his strength, into the bond that hummed between them like music. "I'm not broken anymore," she said quietly. Severin turned her in his arms, his hand cupping her face like she was something precious. His eyes, those ancient, dark eyes that had first looked at her with rage on her behalf, were full of something that looked like reverence. "You were never broken," he said, soft and certain. "Just healing." And standing there in the morning light, wrapped in the arms of a vampire king who'd chosen her and let her choose him back, Sarah finally believed it.